Hello YouTube, my name is Eli, and today I'm going to be starting a new project. My goal here is to have you guys follow along on this project from beginning to end. This project is for a customer that's already bought one previous project, and with this project I decided that I wanted to show everybody all of the steps involved in what I do. I get a lot of questions about the work that I do, so I'm going to try and cover any question that you might have with the videos as I progress along. In order to start from the beginning, I have to start from the very beginning, which is how I prep my wood for a project. And depending on the project that I'm doing and the wood that I'm using, I may go about that differently each time. In this case, I stabilized all my wood prior to starting to cut anything. And that's what I have behind me here is the vacuum chamber setup that I used for this project. Now I have several different vacuum chambers, and there's a specific reason why I use this one for this project, and we're going to take a closer look at that as well as the other equipment that I use. I've seen a lot of videos out there on stabilizing, and most of them are pretty complete, but I feel like most of them leave certain things out that are kind of important to the entire process. We'll go ahead and start from the beginning with the stabilization process. The first thing that I do is I cut my pieces of wood slightly oversized from what I want the finished product to be. In this case, these pieces of wood, the piece of lumber that I cut it off of was 8/4 sapele. So I just left it the full 8/4 here, and I just ripped it into 5/8 inch thick strips. Now these were from offcuts of a different project, and I had a bunch of little chunks laying around, so what you'll see is that I've got a couple different sizes here, and that's because I didn't want to cut up a really nice board for this project. I just wanted to use up the material that I had left over from other projects. I'm sure most of you do the same thing. So back to what I was saying. So these boards are 5/8 of an inch by 8/4 by about 16 inches long. Some of them are 12 inches long. Some of them are 10 inches long. But that's the reason why I have this long vacuum chamber here. The first thing that I do is I cut all my wood down, and once it's all cut to size, I want to get that moisture content down to 0. So the first thing that I do is, after I have them cut to size, is I will weigh one of the pieces. Sometimes I'll weigh all of the pieces. In this case, I weighed all of the pieces that I was going to put in the toaster oven, and I weighed them all together. I forget what the number was exactly because I did this weeks ago, but I put them all on a scale, I weigh them, and then I put them in the toaster oven at 250 degrees. The longer ones that were like 16 inches long, they had to go in a regular oven, because a toaster oven, the inside of it is typically only about 12 inches. I cooked them at 220, 230 degrees, right around there, for about 20 hours. I just left them in there overnight, just to guarantee that there was no moisture in the wood. I want that moisture content to be as close to 0 as humanly possible. And I left them inside of the toaster oven until I was pretty much ready to put them directly into the stabilizing chamber. Now what I did was I prepped my stabilizing chamber, and then I took them out of the toaster oven and I put them directly on the scale. And there was a difference. I think I wrote it down somewhere, but I lost it. There was a difference in my first batch of wood before I put it in the chamber to after the chamber of about 3 ounces. So I mean, that's a lot of moisture inside there, but I live in a pretty humid area anyways. I live in Delaware. Our weather is always humid. Even in the winter time, there's a lot of humidity in the air, so that was a lot of moisture content in that wood. Now I'm going to move on to the stabilizing chamber, because after I take them out of the toaster oven and I put them on the scale, they're cooling down, and I don't want them to start absorbing moisture really quick after I take them out of that oven. I want them to go into the stabilizing chamber and be submerged in the stabilizing resin as soon as possible. That'll keep it from absorbing any extra moisture or water content. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at this stabilizing chamber here and what I have going on. I'm going to move the camera. Okay, now this stabilizing chamber here is one that I made myself. I have, like I said, several other stabilizing chambers. I think I have a total of 4 stabilizing chambers, all different sizes, all for different purposes. If I'm doing knife scales or something and I just want to stabilize a little block of wood, I have a little tiny vacuum chamber that kind of sits off in the corner. Then I have a 10-gallon stabilizing chamber, and then I have a 2.5-gallon stabilizing chamber, and then I made this one. Now what I have found is that I don't really use the 10-gallon as much as I thought I would, or the 5-gallon as much as I thought I would. In most cases, I'm usually either using the really small one or I'm using this one. Now the reason that I made this one, and it's made out of Corian, and what I'll do is I will insert into this video right about now the construction process of this stabilizing chamber, and then we'll get back to it. Now that you can see how it was built, it was just simply Corian that I had floating around the shop, or solid surface. And the reason that I wanted it so long is because with some of my projects I cut strips of wood that are fairly long. Now this one's 30 inches total to the top, which will allow me to stabilize a piece obviously about 30 inches long. In this case, the longest ones that I was stabilizing was 16 inches. I'll give you a look at the inside of it and everything and how it works. Now, one other thing that I want to mention is that with the other stabilizing chambers, they came with 3/4 inch thick plexiglass lids, and those lids almost immediately cracked and spiderwebbed and got to the point where you couldn't even see in them. So don't buy a stabilizing chamber that has a plastic lid, or if you do, just toss that plastic lid. I found this piece of 3/8 inch thick tempered glass on eBay for, I think shipped, it was like $30, so it wasn't too terrible. And that lid right there actually works on all of my stabilizing chambers. It even works on the really little one, but I have a separate piece of glass for that. It's just a square piece of glass that I found somewhere else. Let's take a look at this stabilizing chamber here. I'm going to set it on the ground, and I'm going to kind of focus the camera down on it so that you guys can get a better look. Okay, so this is the actual stabilizing chamber here, and the inside dimensions of it are about 7 inches from point to point, and I made this piece of PVC as an extra internal chamber for it, and I'll show you why in a second. When I'm stabilizing a lot of wood, the larger chamber actually comes in pretty handy. I mean, I can fit quite a bit of wood in there, as you can see, and I can actually fit more than what you see in my hand in there. Probably another 5 or 6 boards, maybe more than that, I can fit in there. And you don't want to just take like a single board and throw it in there. I mean, you could, but the thing about that is you're going to have one board rattling around in there, and it's going to take a lot of resin to get up above that board. It could probably take, for just one little stick like that, it could take 2 gallons of resin. So I have this, and when I want to fill it up, I will put as many boards in there as I can to fill it up, and that minimizes the amount of resin that I have to put in the chamber to cover the wood. And the reason that I have the PVC pipe is because in this case I had to stabilize 2 separate batches, and the second batch wasn't as much. I think the second batch I had 8 sticks, and instead of just putting 8 sticks in there, which barely fills the chamber up, I'm able to put them in the PVC pipe and then drop the PVC pipe inside of the chamber and then fill it with resin. You don't want to fill it with resin before you put it in the chamber, because if you drop it while you're setting it in there and it's kind of heavy, it's probably going to break your chamber, or it's going to splash up in your face. Either way, it's not good. You don't want that. So having the PVC inserts allows me to use less resin when doing smaller batches. So I put my pieces in. So after I take them out of the oven, I weigh them, and once they reach room temperature, as soon as they reach room temperature, I put them in the vacuum chamber, and then I cover them with the resin, you know, by a few inches, usually more. But what I do, as you can see with this jug of resin here, is I will mark how much resin I had before I put the resin on the wood, and then I will put it under a vacuum, and after I take the wood out and I pour the resin, the leftover resin, back in the jug, I can see exactly how much resin I've used, how much resin that wood has soaked up into the material. And the other thing is, I've weighed the wood before I put it in the chamber. So when I go to put the wood in the chamber, I've weighed it on the scale right after it came out of the oven. And I'll write that number down, and then I'll put it in here, cover it with the resin, and put it under a vacuum. And basically what I do is I just set my glass lid over it, turn on my vacuum pump, open the chamber, and you have to watch in there, because with the PVC or with the wood being in there, it will bubble up either way, and you don't want those bubbles to get into your vacuum line and into your vacuum pump, and you don't want it to overflow. If that happens, you got to take it apart, clean it real quick, and add more resin to your stabilizing chamber. Now, one of the things that I've noticed on a lot of stabilizing videos is the amount of time that they put their material in the chamber. In this case, I had my chunks of wood in the chamber for, I think it was 120 hours. Almost, it was like 3 days, something like that. I kept track of it, and I kind of lost those numbers. Actually, what happened was I have a GoPro, and I filmed everything with a GoPro. And when I went back to edit the footage, there was really bad sound quality on it, and I realized I needed to buy a mic. So I went and bought a mic and all that, and I had to reshoot all the footage, which is what I'm doing now. So all these numbers aren't fresh in my head, but we can still cover the ground and get to where we want to be. So I put the vacuum on and I left it in there for 120 hours. I checked it every 8 to 10 hours and until there were no more bubbles coming out of it. As soon as there were no more bubbles coming out of it, I marked down how many hours I had. And you want to let the wood rest underneath of that resin, submerged in that resin, for twice the amount of time that it was under a vacuum. If you don't do that, it's not going to pull the resin into the wood all the way, and you're going to end up with the core of the wood not having any resin inside of it. Okay, so the reason that you want the wood to soak in the resin for twice the amount of time that was under a vacuum is because what's happening in there is the vacuum chamber is pulling all of the air out of the voids inside of the wood and out of all the pores, and that takes some time. But while it's pulling that air out of the voids, it's actually not filling up with resin. And I think that that's where the confusion comes in. And what happens is when you release that vacuum inside of that chamber, there is now a vacuum in the wood itself, and the outside air is back to normal atmosphere. So that wood starts to suck the resin into the fibers of the wood at that point. And considering that the resin is way thicker than air is, it's going to take twice as long to pull that resin back into the wood as it did for it to suck the air out of the wood. Now there are multiple ways of doing this. You can do it with a vacuum chamber, which I have had no issues with on most woods. On some woods, I have had an issue with being able to stabilize it to the core. On those woods, and it gets kind of technical, oily woods like walnut and stuff like that, aren't going to take the stabilizing as well as certain woods will, like, say, maple. So what I also have, and I don't have it right here in front of me, but is a pressure chamber or a pressure pot. And a lot of the bigger guys will use pressure only, and it kind of makes sense because you don't want to have two different setups for what you're doing. But in my case, for me, it's more convenient to use vacuum as much as possible. Now I do have a pressure chamber that I made, and at some point I'll try and do a video on that alone. And that pressure chamber has a 6-inch diameter in the middle, and it's thick steel, like 1/4-inch thick steel. It's threaded on both sides, so I can put quite a bit of pressure inside of that chamber and leave it there for as long as I want. I mean, it holds the pressure really well. But that's a different subject, well, it's the same subject, just a different day. We'll cover it. I'm going to make a video that's more exclusively geared towards stabilizing a little bit further in the future. But for this video is about the project that I'm starting and that I'm working on. So we're just going to continue with that. So after my chunks of wood have sat in my stabilizing chamber for twice the amount of time it was under vacuum. In this case, it sat for longer. I just couldn't get back to it. So roughly it sat under a vacuum for 3 days, and it sat for about 7 days without a vacuum on it. And I usually start my projects weeks before I actually need to. I mean, I plan ahead, and this project doesn't really have a timeline, so I'm kind of making sure that everything is perfect with it. But I try not to rush my projects. After I take it out of the stabilizing chamber, what I do is I pull it out, and I have a set of rubber gloves on, and I just take my rubber gloves and I put my excess liquid back into the container as much as possible, and I place it right in the toaster oven. I don't wrap it in aluminum foil, there's no need for that, but I make sure that it's sitting up off of an aluminum catch tray, and I put a space in between each one of about 1/4 of an inch. and whatever doesn't fit in the toaster oven, I just leave in the vacuum chamber, submerged in the resin. And I usually leave it in the in the toaster oven at 220 degrees for about 8 hours. And when you go back to check it and to take it out, if you see any liquid resin in there that is not set up, you need to leave it in there longer. And 8 hours might be overkill, but you want to make sure that that 220 degrees has gone all the way through the wood and given it time to set up. If you don't do that, you can't go back and restabilize it. It is what it is. You probably got to start over again, use that wood for something else, but it's really not going to work for you. So patience is the key when it comes to stabilizing. After it comes out of the oven, I will take the same batch and then I will weigh it again. So at this point, I've weighed it 3 different times. Actually 4. 3. I don't know. We're about to figure it out. I weighed it before I dried it. I weighed it after I dried it. And then I weighed it after I cooked it and set up the stabilizing resin. So 3 times. And you can take those numbers and kind of compare them. And I know you can't see this on video, but a piece that has been stabilized, you can see the difference in color. I haven't milled this down yet. This is just right out of the oven, and you can see the difference in color. But what you can't see on the video is the difference in weight between them. There's roughly an ounce difference in weight between these 2 pieces of wood, even though there's, and I could weigh them and tell you exactly how much it is. I'm just saying roughly this one weighs probably 2/3 more than what this one weighs. And different woods are going to have different weights after you stabilize them. And that's something that you're going to kind of figure out over time. And you can make notes of this, and I usually do. I have a notebook, and I can tell a piece of maple burl versus a piece of standard maple weighs this before I stabilize it, weighs this, and then I can figure out per square inch what the weight is. And then I kind of know when it comes out of the oven, when it comes out of the stabilizing chamber, and I weigh it whether I've done it right or not, and that makes a difference. Now, the reason that I'm stabilizing this wood for this project, and the reason why I stabilize a lot of the wood for my projects, is because I don't want a lot of wood movement. If you've seen my segmented work for wood turning, there's a lot of really small pieces and fine pieces in there. So my goal is to minimize the wood movement as much as humanly possible. Stabilizing, I think, is a crucial step, and I have not had a single issue with any wood turning project that I've done where I stabilize the wood first. Maybe down the road we will, I don't know, but at this point I've got 100% success rate with everything that I've stabilized. And this isn't the only precaution that I take. We'll get to that down the road a little bit, but at this point I'm ready to start cutting and milling my wood to the right size. And that, I want to show you real quick what the cactus juice looks like and all of that. When you order it, I usually use cactus juice. This is how it comes, and I got a few gallons of it floating around over there. It comes with an activator in there. It's not activated when you get it. I think the little bottles may be activated. I don't know, don't quote me on that, you'll have to check yourself. But this is what it looks like when it comes. It's kind of a yellowy, clear liquid. Pretty thin, not as thin as water, but more like a mineral oil consistency. After you start stabilizing your wood, you'll notice that the resin actually kind of pulls the color of that wood into itself, and starts to change color a little bit. That doesn't hurt anything. It shouldn't affect what you're doing at all, really. And we're actually going to use some of this dye in another project that I'm going to be filming here in a little while. And I'm going to show you how to use the, this dye is actually from Alumilite. I'm going to show you how to use the dye and all of that stuff. And I'm going to go back. Weight isn't the only way you can tell if you stabilized it properly. Again, I mark my jug when I put the wood in and when I take it out. And if I don't see much of a difference in the fluid level, then I'm going to start to question, you know, what happened there, and I might need to go back and do a little research on the wood and see. Because what I can tell you is with maple burl, it roughly weighs twice what it did before you stabilized it. And that's from experience. So if it's 1 ounce before you stabilize it when it's bone dry, after it's cooked in the toaster oven, it should weigh 2 ounces or fairly close to that. But something like redwood burl, it's not going to take it might weigh 1/3 more than it did before it goes in the stabilizing chamber. It's stabilized, but it just doesn't suck up as much resin as something like a maple burl does. So that's something that you're going to figure out over time and down the road, and it's going to take a little while taking notes and going through different species and, you know, all of that before you figure out all the ins and outs of it. So all my wood is stabilized. I'm going to show you what I got here. Sorry for the jittery camera. This is all the wood that I stabilized for this particular project. And you can see there's quite a bit of it there, but there's way more here than what I actually need. And what I'm hoping to do is to get 2 projects that are basically the same out of this bundle of wood. If I don't have enough, that's fine. But before I start the project, I want to make sure that I definitely have enough to do the one project. Because if I don't, and I have to stop in the middle and go back and stabilize more wood and mill it, it's not going to be as accurate, the pieces that you made afterwards. So definitely make sure you kind of overkill your project as far as materials. You don't have to go completely crazy like this. But make sure you overestimate a little bit. You don't want to miscut something and then find out, oh no, I gotta go back and restabilize more wood. This should be plenty to get me through this project. And I can't wait for you guys to see what this project actually is. I'm not gonna tell you quite yet, but I'm gonna be starting this next week, so expect another video soon. One last thing before I wrap this video up completely. Over the course of this next year, I'm going to try and bring a lot more projects and a lot more detail with a lot more explanation to them to my YouTube channel. I've invested a lot of money in new camera gear, other things like that, video editing software, a laptop, things that are going to make that whole process a lot easier. Now, I'm not used to doing all of this, so this is all new to me. The videos will get better, the content's going to get better. I'll loosen up a little bit and we'll see where we can go with this. If you like what you see here, please like and subscribe to my channel. And something you can do that would really help my channel out is to share my work on Facebook or Instagram or however you can, because the best way for me to gain new followers to my channel is by word of mouth.